I still remember the sound of the microphone feedback that evening, the sharp, piercing squeal that made everyone turn their heads. The ballroom at the Willow Lake Country Club was glowing in warm gold light, filled with roses, laughter, and the smell of champagne. It was supposed to be a celebration of love, our 20th wedding anniversary. I'd spent weeks planning every detail. The silver tablecloths, the soft jazz, the family slideshow playing in the background. It was my gift to my husband Richard. 58 years old, charming, and respected in our small Ohio town. But as he tapped his glass for attention, I didn't know he was about to destroy me in front of everyone I loved. He smiled that politician's smile, the one that always made people trust him. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said into the mic, his arm around my shoulders. 20 years is a long time to spend with someone. And tonight, I want to make an announcement. I thought he was going to say something sweet. My heart was full. Then he took a step away from me. His voice changed. 20 years is enough. I think we both deserve new beginnings. The room went silent. I blinked, thinking I'd misheard. "Richard." I whispered. But he didn't even look at me. Instead, he gestured toward the back doors, and that's when she walked in. A woman at least 20 years younger than me, tall, tan, and dripping in a red dress that screamed money. "I want you all to meet Vanessa," Richard continued. "She's my partner now. My future." The words hit like bullets. My knees went weak, and I had to grab the back of a chair to stay upright. The guests gasped. Our neighbors, his co-workers, even my sister. My son Ethan stood frozen near the bar, his mouth open. My daughter Chloe looked like she might cry. Richard kept talking as if none of us were real people, just props in his performance. "Linda and I had a good run," he said, smiling. "But I've realized I need something different now. She'll be moving out of the apartment tomorrow so I can start fresh." That's when the whispers started. Did he just say she's moving out? In front of everyone? Oh my God. My face burned as if every eye in that room were a spotlight aimed at me. I looked around for someone, anyone, to help me make sense of it. My best friend Margaret looked horrified, her hand covering her mouth. Richard's brother, Paul, looked away, embarrassed. Even the band stopped playing. I could hear the ice melting in the glasses, the creak of shoes on the floor, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Richard," I said quietly, my voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. "You're making a mistake." He laughed. "Linda, please. Don't make a scene. It's not like you didn't see this coming. You've let yourself go. You're not the woman I married." His words sliced me open. People gasped again. I felt Chloe's hand on my arm, trembling with anger. "Dad, what's wrong with you?" she cried. But Richard didn't even flinch. He just waved his hand. "She's young, Chloe. You'll understand when you're older." He turned back to the mic, grinning. "Anyway, cheers to new chapters." I stood there, frozen. Every cell in my body screamed humiliation, rage, and disbelief all at once. For 20 years I had stood by him, through layoffs, through his mother's cancer, through every storm life threw our way. I had worked double shifts as a nurse just to keep us afloat when his business went under. And now, he was tossing me aside like last season's coat. Right in front of the people who once admired us as the perfect couple. I wanted to scream, to throw the champagne in his face, to tell the truth about what kind of man he really was. But instead, I took a deep breath. My father used to say, "Never let them see you bleed, Linda." So I straightened my shoulders and forced a smile. Vanessa sauntered up to him, looping her arm around his. "I hope there are no hard feelings," she said with a smirk. "Richard just needs someone who can keep up." The audacity of it made my stomach twist. Around us, people began quietly slipping out, guests uncomfortable with the spectacle. Ethan stormed out first, furious. Chloe stayed, glaring daggers at her father. I turned toward Richard, my voice calm now. "You're right about one thing, Richard," I said softly. "It's time for a new chapter." He smirked, thinking he'd won. "Glad you see it that way." I walked toward the stage, slowly, deliberately. Every eye followed me. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the music start again in the background. I took the microphone from his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, "thank you for celebrating with us tonight. I apologize for the unexpected announcement." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. I smiled faintly. "But before you all leave, I think there's something important to clarify." I turned to Richard. "You said I'm out of the apartment tomorrow?" He nodded smugly. "That's right." I let out a small laugh, one that sent a shiver through the silence. "Funny thing about that, darling. The apartment is mine." For the first time that evening, Richard's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" he said. I looked out at the crowd, our friends, our children, his colleagues, and let the truth pour out like sunlight after a storm. "When you lost your job 15 years ago, who do you think bought that place? Who do you think paid the mortgage all these years while you were consulting with your business partners?" Gasps filled the air. I held my head high. I did. Every penny of it came from my nursing career. The apartment, the car, even your fancy golf club membership, it's all in my name. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Vanessa stepped back, eyes darting toward the exit. "You can pack your things tomorrow, Richard," I said, handing him the microphone. "I'll have the locks changed by noon." The room erupted in whispers. Some people clapped quietly. Others just stared in shock. Richard's face turned crimson. "You can't do this," he hissed. I met his eyes, calm and cold. "Oh, but I already did. You should have read the fine print before trying to replace me." I turned to leave, my heels clicking against the floor like a victory drum. As I walked past Vanessa, I leaned close enough for only her to hear. "You might want to find someone who actually owns something next time." Then I walked out of the ballroom, my children following behind me. The night air outside was cool and clean, washing away the heat of humiliation. I exhaled, my hands trembling. Not from fear, but from power I hadn't felt in years. What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning. Richard had no idea who he was really dealing with. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, the house still smelling of champagne and roses, staring at the stack of untouched anniversary cards. The gold balloons bobbed above me like ghosts of a life that didn't exist anymore. Richard hadn't come home. Of course he hadn't. I imagined him at some hotel with Vanessa, probably spinning another story about how he'd been the victim in all of this. But instead of crying, I just sat there with my cup of coffee gone cold, replaying the last 20 years like a movie reel I finally understood. I met Richard when I was 28, fresh out of nursing school and working nights at Mercy General. He came in with a fractured wrist from a softball game. He was charming, funny, the kind of man who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I'd grown up in a working-class family. My father was a mechanic, my mother a diner waitress, so when someone like Richard took an interest in me, it felt like a fairy tale. He worked in real estate, had a confident air that made me feel safe. Back then, I thought that's what love was, safety, admiration, and the dream of something bigger than the life I'd known. We got married 2 years later in my parents' backyard under a string of Christmas lights. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. Or at least I thought it was. For years, I worked overtime while he built his business. He promised it would pay off, that we'd retire early, travel, buy a cabin by the lake. I believed him. I believed every word. I remember coming home one night after a 16-hour shift, my feet aching, and finding him on the couch with takeout containers everywhere. He told me he'd had a bad day, lost another client, and I held him while he cried. I didn't see then that I was holding a man who didn't want a partner. He wanted a caretaker. When the real estate market crashed, he lost almost everything. The car, the house, the savings, gone overnight. I still remember the day he told me he'd temporarily put the deed to our new apartment in my name because it would be safer from creditors. He made it sound like a strategy. I didn't realize then that it would one day become my lifeline. While he moped and blamed the economy, I picked up extra shifts at the hospital. There were months when I worked 70 hours a week. My hands were cracked from sanitizer, my back ached, but I paid every bill on time. I made sure our kids had shoes that fit and food on the table. And somehow, I never let them see how tired I really was. Richard's pride wouldn't let him take a regular job. He kept chasing deals that never closed, making promises he couldn't keep. I watched him become someone I didn't recognize. Angry, resentful, blaming me for his failures. "You don't believe in me anymore," he'd say, after I asked why he hadn't even tried to find steady work. And I'd apologize, thinking maybe I had been too hard on him. That's the thing about women like me. We're trained to make ourselves smaller so others can feel big. But not everything about those years was pain. There were moments of beauty too. Chloe's first piano recital, Ethan's graduation, the nights we all sat together watching old movies while I pretended not to notice Richard scrolling through his phone. I clung to those memories like lifeboats. I kept telling myself love could survive anything, even disappointment. My father used to say, "Linda, you were born to heal people, but don't forget to save some of that medicine for yourself." I never listened. Until now. After he left the hospital industry, Richard started spending more time networking. I thought it was business. It wasn't. There were signs. Perfume that wasn't mine, late-night texts, long business trips that didn't make sense. I confronted him once, but he turned it around, accusing me of paranoia. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding his phone, my hands shaking as I read a message from someone named Vanessa. "You looked so handsome today." When I asked who she was, he smiled like I was being ridiculous. "A client," he said. "Don't be dramatic." And I wanted so badly to believe him that I did. I told myself I was overreacting. The truth is, I didn't want to lose everything I'd built. I thought if I just loved him harder, it would fix whatever had broken between us. But you can't love someone into decency. You can't pour yourself into a person who's full of holes and expect to stay whole. Over the years, I became invisible. The kids grew up and moved out, and Richard started treating me like a piece of furniture. Something that had always been there, expected to stay clean and quiet. He'd leave without saying goodbye, come home without asking how my day was. And still, every Sunday, I cooked his favorite roast and set the table for two. What he never knew was that while he was busy pretending to be important, I had been quietly building something of my own. The hospital where I worked offered retirement matching. I invested. I saved. I took financial literacy classes online after my shifts ended. I bought small properties in my name, nothing fancy, just rentals. And I made sure every document was airtight. Richard thought I was just a tired nurse who didn't understand real business. He had no idea that I'd been managing more assets than he ever had. I'd always stayed humble, because my first husband, God rest his soul, had taught me humility before he passed. Before I met Richard, I was a widow. My first husband, Michael, was a paramedic. We were married only 5 years before he died in a highway accident. He was the one who told me, "Never let anyone know exactly how much power you hold. The quiet ones last the longest." I carried that lesson with me my entire life. Michael had left me a small life insurance policy, just enough to start fresh. I used part of it to go back to school and finish my nursing degree. The rest? I invested carefully. Even Richard never knew the full story. I told him I used it all for tuition. Some secrets are best kept until the right moment. As the sun rose that morning after the party, light spilled into the kitchen, and I finally stood up from the table. My reflection in the window looked older, yes, but also stronger. The woman who'd stood on that ballroom stage wasn't the same woman who once cried herself to sleep wondering what she'd done wrong. I realized something important. I had given 20 years of my life to a man who didn't deserve even one of my tears. And now, I had a chance to take it all back. Not just my dignity, but my future. When Chloe came downstairs that morning, her eyes were swollen from crying. She looked at me like she expected me to crumble. "Mom," she whispered, "are you okay?" I smiled at her, brushing a lock of her hair behind her ear. "I'm better than okay, sweetheart." She frowned. "How can you say that? He humiliated you." I took her hands in mine. "Because he did me a favor. I've spent too long waiting for him to change. Now, I finally get to change my own life." She didn't understand then, but she would. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and called my lawyer, Denise, a college friend who'd helped me set up my rental agreements years ago. When I told her what happened, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Well, Linda, it sounds like it's time to clean house." That's when it hit me. All those years of sacrifice, every night shift, every tear I'd swallowed, every birthday I'd spent alone, they hadn't been for nothing. They'd built the foundation for my freedom. I wasn't just a wife left behind. I was a woman with resources, intelligence, and resilience. Richard thought he'd blindsided me, but in truth, he'd just walked straight into a life he no longer controlled. I looked around the apartment that morning, the place filled with memories, both beautiful and bitter, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. I didn't need revenge. Not yet. What I needed was clarity, strategy, and patience. I poured my coffee, opened my old notebook where I used to track bills and expenses, and began to write a new list. At the top, I wrote in capital letters, Phase 1, remember who you are. What I didn't know at that moment was that my years of sacrifice were about to be tested in ways I never imagined. Because Richard wasn't done trying to destroy me, and I wasn't done proving that the woman he underestimated was the one who'd rise from the ashes and take everything back. The days that followed were a blur of silence and whispers. News of Richard's announcement spread through our small Ohio town faster than wildfire. At the grocery store, people I'd known for years avoided eye contact. Others gave me those pitying looks I'd always hated, the kind that said, "Poor woman. She must have done something wrong." I smiled politely, pretending not to notice, but inside I was boiling. Not from shame, but from the realization that my entire life had been built around keeping other people comfortable, even at my own expense. Richard didn't move out immediately like I told him to. Of course not. He came home 2 days later, swaggering through the door as if nothing had happened. His things were still scattered around: the golf clubs, the cufflinks, the drawer full of receipts and lies. He looked at me with that fake calm he always wore when he wanted control. "I need a few weeks to find a place," he said, not asking but declaring. "Vanessa and I are still figuring things out." I laughed. "You mean she hasn't kicked you out of her apartment yet?" That wiped the smirk off his face. "Watch your tone, Linda," he said quietly, the edge in his voice sharper than I'd heard in years. "You've embarrassed me enough." I met his eyes and said, "Good. Now you know how it feels." He stayed in the guest room, slamming doors and pretending he still owned the place. He'd leave early every morning and come back late, reeking of expensive cologne that wasn't his. At first, I ignored him. Then the little things started. He'd unplug my phone charger, accidentally take my car keys, or turn off the hot water while I was in the shower. Petty, childish acts of control. One evening, I came home to find one of my framed photos, the one of me holding our newborn son, smashed on the floor. When I asked what happened, he shrugged. "Things fall sometimes." That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time in our marriage. But it wasn't just Richard. Somehow, his arrogance began infecting everyone around him. Our son Ethan stopped calling as much, claiming he was too busy with work. When I finally got him on the phone, he sounded distant. "Mom, Dad says you've been acting crazy lately," he said. "What's going on?" I felt my heart tighten. "Ethan, your father humiliated me in public and moved his mistress into our lives. You were there." He hesitated. "Yeah, but he said you overreacted. He says you're trying to ruin his career." His words stung like salt in an open wound. "Honey," I said softly, "do you really believe that?" He didn't answer. I could hear voices in the background, Richard's, faint but distinct. That's when I realized my own son was living with him. Chloe, bless her, stood by me at first. She came over every other day, checking in, bringing groceries, sitting with me while I pretended to read. But even she began to waver after a while. "Mom, maybe you should just let it go," she said one afternoon as we folded laundry together. "Dad says he just wants peace." I looked up from the shirt in my hands. "Peace." I repeated. "He wants control, Chloe. He's trying to rewrite the story so I look like the villain." She sighed, torn between us. "I just don't want this to get uglier than it already is." I smiled sadly. Sweetheart, it's already ugly. The only question is who's going to walk away clean. The following week, Richard threw a dinner at his brother's house and didn't invite me, but invited our children. I found out from a neighbor who'd seen them all leaving together. When I called Chloe later, she admitted she'd gone. He said it was a family thing, she murmured. I didn't think it would hurt you. I closed my eyes. It's okay, I said. You're still young enough to believe your father's performance. One day you'll see the curtain fall. She started crying. Mom, please don't be like this. I softened. I'm not being like anything, sweetheart. I'm just telling the truth. By that point, the emotional isolation had become suffocating. My co-workers at the hospital tiptoed around me, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Even Margaret, my best friend, started keeping her distance. I just don't want to get caught in the middle, she said one afternoon over coffee. You know how small towns are. I nodded, though it stung deeply. It was like being erased from my own life, everyone slowly stepping back as if my heartbreak were contagious. But what none of them realized was that the more alone I became, the quieter and stronger I got. Then came the final insult. One morning, a notice arrived in the mail. Richard had filed a claim stating that he was entitled to spousal support since I was financially stable, and he had been out of the workforce for years. I almost laughed out loud. The man who'd abandoned me, cheated on me, and humiliated me in public was now asking for money. I read the letter twice just to be sure I hadn't imagined it. My hands trembled, not from fear but from fury. I called Denise immediately. She chuckled dryly. Oh, he's really testing you now. But don't worry, Linda. Legally, he doesn't stand a chance. Still, the thought that he even tried burned through me. The weeks dragged on, each one revealing a new layer of Richard's cruelty. He started spreading rumors that I'd been unstable for years, that I'd manipulated him into signing over property. People who once greeted me at church now turned their heads. The woman who used to lead the choir told me, I'm praying for your healing. Healing from what? From believing in the wrong man? I thanked her anyway. That's what polite women do. We thank people even when their kindness cuts us open. But one afternoon, something shifted. I was sitting on the back porch when I noticed the hydrangeas I'd planted years ago were finally blooming again. Their petals were the same soft blue Michael had loved. I realized then that life, like those flowers, doesn't stop growing just because someone tries to trample it. I looked at the house, my house, and made a silent promise. No one will ever make me feel small here again. That night, I opened my laptop and began digging. Old files, contracts, names, bank statements. Everything I could find that tied Richard to his so-called business ventures. If he wanted a war, he was about to get one. The more I looked, the more I found. Loans he'd hidden, unpaid debts, shady partnerships that could ruin his reputation. I printed everything and filed it neatly in a folder marked Truth. For years, I'd been the quiet woman behind him, the one who smiled at parties and cleaned up the mess afterward. But now, I wasn't cleaning anymore. I was documenting, observing, preparing. I knew I couldn't rely on anyone else to fight this battle for me. Ethan was lost in his father's shadow, Chloe was torn, and most of our so-called friends had shown their true colors. So, I stopped waiting for rescue. I remembered something Michael used to say when he was training new paramedics. When help doesn't come, you become the help. That night, I whispered it to myself like a prayer. But Richard still believed I was defeated. He strutted around town with Vanessa on his arm, pretending I was some bitter ex-wife clinging to the past. Little did he know, I was gathering everything I needed to dismantle the empire he'd built on my back. The more he pushed, the clearer my mind became. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way he wanted me to be. I was focused. I poured a glass of wine, sat at my desk, and looked at the growing stack of evidence. You've had your turn, Richard, I said aloud to the empty room. Now it's mine. Because the truth was, I was done being everyone's doormat. It was time to remind them who they were dealing with. The following morning, I woke up before dawn. The house was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. The kind of calm that comes when pain hardens into purpose. I brewed a cup of coffee, opened the curtains, and watched the early light spill across the kitchen floor. I'd spent too long reacting to Richard's cruelty. Now it was my turn to act. I started by making a list. Not just a list of tasks, but of people. Names from the past 20 years, friends, co-workers, business partners, anyone who might know something about Richard's life outside our marriage. When I finished, I picked up the phone and called Denise. "It's time," I said simply. She didn't even ask what I meant. "Come by my office this afternoon," she replied. "And bring everything you've got." By the time I arrived, Denise had already pulled records from the county clerk's office. She slid a folder across her desk. "You're going to want to see this." Inside were copies of property deeds, tax filings, and something else. Emails linking Richard to a company I'd never heard of. Maplewood Holdings? I read aloud. Denise nodded. "It's one of his side businesses. He's been using it to funnel money through fake investments. My guess? Vanessa's involved too." I felt my jaw tighten. So he's not just a cheater, he's a crook. Denise smiled. "Darling, most men like Richard are both." For the next week, I threw myself into the investigation. Every spare minute between my nursing shifts went toward uncovering what Richard had built behind my back. I visited the bank, combed through public records, even spoke to an old accountant who'd once handled our joint returns. Each piece of information painted the same picture: Richard was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, unpaid loans under different business names, and a line of credit he'd taken out against a property I owned. The worst part? He'd forged my signature. I remember staring at the document in disbelief, my name written in clumsy, uneven ink. My stomach twisted. "He didn't even bother to make it convincing," I muttered. The bank manager looked uneasy. "Mrs. Whitaker, if you'd like to pursue legal action, we'll cooperate fully." I nodded, tucking the papers into my bag. "Oh, I will. But not yet." Because anger alone wouldn't win this battle. I needed precision. Timing. One evening, I called an old friend from the hospital, Tanya, one of the sharpest women I knew. Before becoming a nurse, she'd worked in finance. When I told her what I'd found, she whistled softly. "Girl, your husband's playing with fire. And he's doing it under your name." "That's why I'm calling you," I said. "I want to know how deep this goes." Tanya laughed. "Let's find out." We spent hours combing through data, tracing payments, connecting dots. By midnight, we'd built a map of Richard's hidden world. Offshore transfers, fake consulting fees, hush payments. He'd been running a scam for years, pretending to be successful while secretly living off my income and credit. "He's about 3 missed payments away from losing everything," Tanya said. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt since that night in the ballroom: satisfaction. "Good," I said. "Let's make sure he misses them." But I didn't want to destroy him right away. That would be too easy. I wanted him to watch it happen, slowly, publicly, and with no one left to blame but himself. So I started small. I called the bank to freeze any joint accounts. Then I cancelled every shared credit card. Within a week, his access to my money was gone. I imagined the look on his face when his card got declined at one of his fancy dinners. It was a small victory, but it felt delicious. Around that time, Chloe started noticing a change in me. "Mom, you seem different," she said one afternoon as we sat on the porch. "You're not sad anymore." I smiled at her. I was sad when I thought I'd lost everything. Turns out, I just lost the wrong person. She laughed softly, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Are you sure you're okay?" "Better than okay," I said. "I'm planning something." She tilted her head. "Should I be scared?" "Not if you're on my side." While I worked in the daylight, Richard continued his charade in the dark. He still showed up at the house occasionally, usually to grab more of his things, or to taunt me. "You're wasting your time trying to fight me," he said one evening, standing in the doorway with a smirk. "No judge is going to side with a bitter old nurse." I looked up from my paperwork and said, "You're right. They'll side with the homeowner whose name is on every deed, title, and account." His smile faltered, just a flicker, but enough for me to see fear beneath the arrogance. I tucked that image away like a keepsake. Tanya and Denise helped me dig even deeper. We discovered that Vanessa wasn't just his mistress. She was also his business partner, and not a very smart one. The company they'd created together had defaulted on several payments. If we time this right, Denise said, we can report them both to the IRS and the state. The penalties alone will crush them. I nodded slowly. Not yet, I said. I want to see what happens when they start turning on each other first. Denise grinned. You always were the patient type. As the days turned into weeks, I began to see Richard unravel. His calls to Ethan became shorter, angrier. Chloe told me he'd been drinking more. One afternoon, he even showed up at my workplace, trying to cause a scene in the hospital lobby. You think you're smarter than me? He shouted. You're nothing without me. I stared at him calmly in front of my co-workers. Then it's a good thing I've spent 20 years doing everything on my own. Security escorted him out. I went back to my shift without missing a beat. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of wine, watching the lights flicker across the neighborhood. Somewhere out there, Richard was realizing that the life he'd built was slipping away. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. His lies were collapsing under their own weight. But I knew I couldn't stop here. There were still debts tied to my name, still damage to undo. And I wanted more than survival, I wanted justice. I thought of all the women I'd met over the years who'd told me their own stories of betrayal, wives, mothers, daughters who'd been told to stay quiet, to endure. I thought of how easily men like Richard got away with it because women like us were taught to forgive. But forgiveness, I realized, doesn't mean letting someone off the hook. It means freeing yourself from the need to beg for their decency. I wasn't begging anymore. By the end of the month, I had everything I needed. Documents, recordings, witness statements. Proof that would destroy his reputation, his finances, and his partnership with Vanessa. Denise called me one evening after reviewing the files. You're ready, she said. I exhaled slowly. Then it's time. She chuckled. You sound like a woman about to light a match. That's exactly what I am, I said. I closed my eyes that night, the first peaceful sleep I'd had in years. Because armed with the truth, I finally understood something simple but powerful. Richard had spent decades believing I was weak. What he never realized was that quiet women like me don't break, we build. And when the time comes, we build something strong enough to bury the men who tried to destroy us. Armed with this information, I was ready to teach everyone a lesson they'd never forget. It started with an invitation. 3 weeks after uncovering the last of Richard's financial secrets, I sent out gold-embossed envelopes to every person who had ever admired our marriage from the outside. Colleagues, neighbors, old friends, even a few of Richard's former business partners. The envelope read, Celebration of Renewal, hosted by Linda Whitaker. Inside, the message was simple. Join me for an evening of gratitude and new beginnings as I close one chapter and begin another. Formal attire required. Venue, the Garden Terrace, October 12th. There was no mention of Richard, but I knew he'd hear about it. And I wanted him to. The Garden Terrace was the same place we'd held our anniversary party. The same marble floors, the same crystal chandeliers. I'd booked it intentionally. There's something poetic about ending a story where it began. By the second week of October, I'd finalized everything. Denise had arranged for a notary and a few trusted reporters from a local paper to attend under the guise of covering a charity event. Tanya had discreetly transferred all of Richard's fraudulent documents to a safe digital drive. And I had one more surprise up my sleeve, something that would destroy what little pride he had left. But before that night could happen, I needed bait. So, I called Richard. Hello, darling, he said, voice dripping with arrogance. Miss me already? I kept my tone even. Actually, I'm hosting a little gathering. It's for friends and family, to celebrate moving forward. There was a pause. Then, amusement. Moving forward? You mean moving on from me? Something like that, I replied. I thought you might want to bring Vanessa. After all, people are curious to meet her properly. He laughed. You're really something, Linda. Inviting the woman who replaced you. Are you trying to make peace or prove a point? Maybe both, I said softly. Either way, it's an evening you won't want to miss. When I hung up, my hands were steady. He would come. His ego wouldn't allow him to refuse an audience. And that was exactly what I needed. The night of the event arrived crisp and clear, with the air scented faintly of jasmine and rain. I wore a sleek, navy blue gown, elegant, understated, powerful. Chloe helped zip me up, her eyes gleaming with pride. You look like you're about to go to war, she said. In a way, I am, I answered. She hesitated. Are you sure about this, Mom? Once you do this, there's no going back. I looked at her reflection in the mirror. Sweetheart, I don't want to go back. At 7 sharp, I walked into the garden terrace. The lights were soft, the music gentle. Guests mingled over glasses of champagne, whispering as they noticed the resemblance to that fateful anniversary night. I saw familiar faces, women who'd once admired our marriage, men who'd envied Richard's luck. I smiled at all of them, calm and radiant. At 7:45, the doors opened again. Richard strutted in arm with Vanessa. She wore a glittering red dress, too tight, too loud. Everything about her screamed insecurity wrapped in confidence. Richard looked smug, polished in his black tuxedo, his grin wide and practiced. Linda, he said, as if greeting an old friend. You look different. I feel different, I replied. Glad you could make it. He glanced around. Nice crowd. You really can't resist the spotlight, can you? Oh, this spotlight isn't for me, I said, my voice silk over steel. Vanessa gave me a smile so fake it could have been carved from wax. So lovely of you to invite us, she purred. We were surprised, honestly. After everything that happened, I wasn't sure you'd want to see us again. I tilted my head. Oh, I'm all about closure these days. We made polite conversation until dinner began. The tables were lit with soft candles, silver cutlery gleaming. As everyone settled, I stood and lifted my glass. Thank you all for coming, I began. A few months ago, I stood in this very room and thought my life was over. My husband of 20 years, Richard Whittaker, told me he'd found someone new, someone younger, someone who made him feel alive again. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Richard's smirk froze. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. But what he forgot, I continued, voice clear and strong, was that sometimes, when a man throws away a good woman, he's really just throwing away the one person who kept his world from falling apart. I gestured to a small projector screen that lit up behind me. The first slide appeared, documents, signed and dated, showing property titles. You see, when Richard told me to leave his apartment, he forgot it wasn't his. It was mine. Along with 3 other properties he's been living off of for years. Gasps. People leaned forward. Richard's face turned a deep, furious red. Now, I said sweetly, you might wonder why I'm bringing this up tonight. Because this isn't a story of heartbreak. It's a story of rebirth and accountability. Slide 2. Bank statements, all tied to fraudulent transactions under his business, Maplewood Holdings. Then the forged signature, mine, blown up on the screen. I didn't even know my handwriting had gotten so sloppy, I quipped. The room erupted in whispers. Vanessa's voice broke through the noise. What the hell is this, Richard? He turned on her instantly. She's lying. She's making this up. I smiled. Actually, no. My attorney, Ms. Denise Carter, verified every document. She's here tonight, along with a notary and 2 financial auditors. Denise stood, waving lightly from her table. And then, I delivered the final strike. The screen changed again, showing a series of emails between Richard and Vanessa. Evidence of them manipulating company funds to cover their personal expenses. Fraud, embezzlement, forgery, I listed calmly. Quite the romantic resume, don't you think? Vanessa shot out of her seat. You set us up, she shouted. No, I said. You set yourselves up. I just turned on the light. The room buzzed with shock, cameras flashing, murmurs swelling. Richard lunged forward, his voice breaking into a roar. "You'll pay for this, Linda." I met his eyes. "No, Richard. For the first time, you will." At that cue, 2 uniformed officers stepped forward from the entrance, polite but firm. "Mr. Whitaker, we'd like you to come with us," one said, holding out a warrant. He froze, his face drained of color. "This is insane." Vanessa backed away from him, trembling. "You said it was safe, Richard. You said no one would find out." The crowd parted as they cuffed him. The silence was deafening. Then, someone started clapping. Slow, deliberate. It spread, building into applause that filled the hall. I stood there, calm as a still lake, watching the man who once made me feel small shrink into nothing. When the officers led him out, I raised my glass one last time. "To new beginnings," I said. The crowd echoed me, their glasses lifted high. "To new beginnings." I smiled. "And to never mistaking silence for weakness again." Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, I stepped outside into the cool air. Chloe joined me, slipping her hand into mine. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said softly, watching the stars. "He did it to himself. I just gave the world a front row seat." And for the first time since that terrible night months ago, I truly felt free. Because revenge hadn't just given me closure. It had given me clarity. The woman Richard tried to destroy no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger. Someone who no longer needed anyone's permission to rebuild her life. And rebuild I would. Later, I got a call from the district attorney's office. Richard had requested to see me. My stomach tightened. I didn't owe him anything. But something inside me, curiosity, maybe closure, made me agree. The detention center was cold and sterile, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. I walked in wearing a cream-colored suit, simple but elegant. The guard led me into a small room with a metal table. Richard sat on the other side, looking older, smaller somehow. His once perfect hair was unkempt, his eyes hollow. "Linda," he said quietly, "you didn't have to do this." "Yes," I replied evenly. "I did." He leaned forward, desperation flickering in his eyes. "You've made your point. You've humiliated me. But if you drop the charges, we can." "Stop," I interrupted. "There's no we anymore. There hasn't been for a long time." He clenched his fists. "You think you're better than me now?" I met his gaze steadily. "No. I've always been better. I just stopped apologizing for it." For a moment, the room was silent except for the buzz of the fluorescent lights. He slumped back in his chair. "I lost everything," he said bitterly. "The company, the apartment, my reputation." "You didn't lose them," I said softly. "You threw them away." He looked up, his voice cracking. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "No. Hating you would mean you still have power over me. I don't hate you, Richard. I pity you." He flinched as if I'd struck him. I stood, gathering my purse. "Goodbye, Richard." As I walked away, I heard him whisper, "Linda, please." But I didn't turn back. Some doors, once closed, should never be reopened. When I got home, Chloe was waiting with dinner. We ate quietly, laughter slowly replacing tension. She was stronger now too, steadier, more confident. Maybe seeing me fight for myself had reminded her she didn't have to shrink for anyone either. After we ate, she asked, "What now?" I smiled. "Now? I live." She grinned. "That's it. That's everything." The following month, I started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown. I met women who'd lost far more than I had: homes, children, even their sense of worth. I listened to their stories and saw pieces of myself in each one. Some were still stuck in the middle of their storm. Others were just beginning to rebuild. One evening, a young woman named Oria asked, "How did you know when it was time to fight back?" I thought for a moment, then said, "When I realized silence was costing me more than speaking ever would." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly. That was the first time I felt my pain turning into purpose. A few months passed. The trial loomed, but I didn't dread it. I was ready. One morning, Denise called. "Good news," she said. "Richards agreed to a plea deal. He'll serve time and pay restitution. The judge wants to close the case quickly." I felt an unexpected calm. It was over. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom with my head high. Reporters whispered, cameras clicked, but I barely noticed. Richard avoided my eyes as the judge read the charges. When asked if I wished to speak, I stood. "Your Honor," I began, "for years I lived my life believing that love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife meant forgiving everything. But sometimes, forgiveness becomes a cage. Today, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for release." The judge nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker." When it was over, I stepped outside into the sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in decades. Denise hugged me. "You did it." I smiled. "No." I finally stopped pretending I couldn't. That night, I returned to the garden terrace. Empty this time, quiet and still. The chandeliers reflected softly on the marble floors. Just as they had the night everything fell apart. I stood in the center of the room and whispered, "I forgive you, Richard. But I'll never forget what you taught me." Because sometimes, strength doesn't roar. It whispers. It heals. It rebuilds. And as I turned off the lights and walked out, I knew, the woman who once trembled in this room no longer existed. She'd been replaced by someone unbreakable. Someone free. When the dust began to settle, it didn't happen all at once. Justice doesn't crash in like a wave. It creeps quietly, one consequence at a time. The town of Maplewood had found a new obsession. For weeks, everyone whispered about the Whitaker scandal, the betrayal, the arrest, the courtroom spectacle. Neighbors who used to look through me now waved from their porches. Some out of sympathy, others out of curiosity. I had become a living parable, the woman who lost everything but somehow came out stronger. I didn't mind the attention anymore. It wasn't the kind that wanted to take, it was the kind that wanted to understand. But even victory carries a shadow. One morning, I opened my mailbox to find a thick envelope with Richard's handwriting. Inside was a short letter. "Linda, I'm sorry. Not for getting caught, but for forgetting who you were. You deserved better than what I gave you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just, don't let me be the last mistake you remember. Richard." I read it 3 times before folding it neatly and placing it back in the envelope. There was no anger left, only a deep, quiet sadness. The kind that comes when you realize someone you once loved finally saw you clearly, but only when it was too late. The trial had made Chloe cautious, but also brave. She started going to therapy, working through years of resentment she'd buried. One afternoon, we sat in the kitchen as she stirred a pot of soup, her hair tied back like mine used to be. "You know," she said, "I used to blame you for everything Dad did." I looked up. "You did." She nodded slowly. "I thought if you'd just fought back sooner, maybe he wouldn't have turned into whatever he became." She paused. "But now I get it. You were surviving. And that takes more strength than I realized." I reached across the table and took her hand. "We both survived, sweetheart. That's what matters." She smiled faintly. "Yeah. But I'm done just surviving. I want to live." That night, I lay awake thinking about her words. I want to live. For so many years, that idea had been foreign to me. I'd lived for others, Richard, Chloe, the family name. Now, I finally understood what living for myself could mean. 2 weeks later, I got a visit from someone unexpected, Richard's lawyer. He stood awkwardly on my porch, holding a briefcase. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "I know you probably don't want to see me, but I'm here on Richard's behalf." I sighed. "What now?" He cleared his throat. Before sentencing, Richard asked me to deliver this. He handed me another envelope, thinner than the first. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Richard had signed over his remaining business shares to me. He said it was restitution, the lawyer explained. He wanted to make sure you had full control of everything he built, without his name attached. I stared at the document for a long time. He really signed this willingly? The lawyer nodded. He said it was the least he could do. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or pity. Just closure. I signed my acceptance, thanked the lawyer, and watched him leave. As the car pulled away, I whispered goodbye, Richard, for the last time. Taking control of those shares was the beginning of something new. Instead of selling the company, I repurposed it. With Tanya's help, we restructured Maplewood Holdings into a non-profit foundation, one dedicated to helping women over 40 rebuild their lives after financial or emotional abuse. At the opening ceremony, I gave a short speech. My voice was steady, my heart full. Sometimes, I told the crowd, a broken home can become the foundation for something better. What was once used to manipulate and deceive can be rebuilt into a tool for healing and independence. There were tears in the audience, some mine, some theirs. When I looked down, I saw Chloe standing near the front row, clapping through her tears. Behind her, Denise smiled proudly. That moment felt like redemption. Not just for me, but for every woman who'd ever been told she was too old, too weak, too dependent to start again. Later that year, Marianne reached out again. She invited me to her home for coffee. When I arrived, she hugged me tightly. I wanted to thank you, she said. You gave my brother a chance to face himself. He writes to me from time to time. He's different, quieter. I hope he finds peace, I said softly. So do I, she replied. But you, Linda, you found more than peace. You found purpose. I smiled. Maybe that's what survival really means. Not just living through the storm, but building something beautiful after it. A few months passed. Life slowed into a comfortable rhythm. I spent mornings at the foundation, afternoons tending my garden, and evenings with Chloe, who had started dating a kind man named Michael. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the fireflies, she leaned her head on my shoulder. You know, Mom, she said, you could meet someone too. You're allowed to be happy. I laughed softly. Oh, I am happy. She smiled. No, I mean really happy. I looked out at the night sky, remembering all the years I'd spent waiting for someone else to validate my worth. Maybe one day, I said. But for now, I have everything I need. The true reckoning came not in the courtroom or through revenge, but in quiet forgiveness. Forgiving myself for the years I stayed silent. Forgiving the girl I once was, who thought love meant endurance. Forgiving the man who couldn't see my worth until it was too late. When I finally looked in the mirror, I didn't see the broken woman from that anniversary night. I saw someone reborn, strong, wise, and unshakably calm. And that, I realized, was the ultimate justice. A few days before Christmas, I received one last letter from Richard. It was short, just a note saying he'd been transferred to a facility upstate and was joining a prison education program. I don't expect you to respond, he wrote. But I wanted you to know, I've stopped blaming you. Maybe that's the first step to forgiving myself. I folded the letter and placed it in a box with the others. Closure doesn't always look like applause or headlines. Sometimes, it's a quiet exhale after years of holding your breath. That night, I lit a candle in the window, something my mother used to do when she wanted to honor the past but welcome the future. As the flame flickered, I whispered, "Thank you, life, for giving me back to myself." Because in the end, that's what the reckoning truly was. Not punishment, not revenge, but balance. The world had righted itself. And so had I. Winter melted into spring, and Maplewood seemed to exhale with me. The frost retreated, the trees began to bud, and for the first time in years, the world outside my window felt like it matched the calm inside my chest. I had rebuilt my life piece by piece. Not in a grand cinematic way, but in small, deliberate choices. I started each morning with coffee on the porch, the scent of roses and wet soil reminding me that growth always comes after the coldest seasons. The Linda Whitaker Foundation was thriving. We had secured funding from a few local businesses, and we'd begun hosting workshops, financial literacy, confidence coaching, even self-defense classes. Women from all walks of life came through our doors, quiet divorcees, single mothers, retirees looking for purpose. They came broken. They left believing again. One afternoon, As I packed up from a workshop, I noticed a new volunteer talking with Chloe. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to smile before his lips did. I overheard Chloe laugh, a sound I hadn't heard from her in years, and I turned just as he walked over. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Daniel Hughes. I'm a counselor at the community center downtown. Chloe told me about your foundation. Thought I'd see if I could help." I shook his hand, noticing how warm it felt. "We could always use more good people," I said. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a regular face around the office. He offered therapy sessions to women who couldn't afford private counseling. He was patient, thoughtful, and never once made me feel small for asking questions. One day, after we finished a long planning session, he looked at me with a gentle curiosity. "You ever take time for yourself, Linda?" I smiled faintly. "This is for myself." He shook his head. "No, I mean real time. The kind that doesn't involve giving to everyone else." I paused, realizing how foreign the idea sounded. I wouldn't know where to start. "How about dinner?" he said simply. I laughed, a little caught off guard. "Are you asking me out, Mr. Hughes?" He grinned. "I'm asking if you like Italian food." I thought for a moment. The last time someone had asked me that, it had been Richard, on our first date, 22 years ago. But this time felt different. There was no performance, no agenda. Just an invitation to breathe. "I do," I said softly. "I like Italian food." Dinner with Daniel was easy. We met at a small restaurant by the lake, the kind with flickering candles and soft music. Conversation flowed naturally, from books to travel to the quirks of small-town life. He didn't pry into my past, though I knew he knew parts of it. When I mentioned the Foundation's next project, a transitional housing program, his eyes lit up. "That's incredible," he said. "You're building something that'll outlive all the pain that started it." I took a sip of my wine, smiling. That's the goal. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the good kind. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "You know, you talk about your past like it belongs to someone else." I looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You say back then or when it happened, but never when it happened to me. Like you've already forgiven that version of yourself." His observation caught me off guard. I blinked, thinking about it. "Maybe I have," I said quietly. "Maybe I had to." He nodded. "Then that's the bravest thing I've ever heard." Weeks turned into months. Spring turned to summer. Daniel and I began seeing each other more often, slowly, without rush or expectation. Chloe teased me constantly, saying, "It's about time you had a little romance again, Mom." But it wasn't romance that healed me. It was peace. For the first time, love didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a garden, something that grew quietly when tended with care. Sometimes, we'd walk by the lake at dusk, our hands brushing but never needing to hold. Other times, we'd sit on the porch in silence, the sound of crickets filling the air. There was comfort in that stillness, a shared understanding that not all broken things need fixing. Some just need patience. One evening, after a long day at the Foundation, Chloe came home carrying a bouquet of daisies. "What's this for?" I asked. She grinned. "The board approved your expansion proposal, Mom. The Foundation's getting its second building." I froze, speechless. She hugged me tight. "You did it, Mom. You turned everything they used to hurt you into something that heals others." I felt tears sting my eyes. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "We did it." As I looked around, the warm lights, the soft laughter, the life we'd rebuilt, I realized that the woman who once stood trembling at her anniversary party was long gone. In her place stood someone whole. A year later, the Foundation's new building opened. It was bright, modern, and full of life. The media covered the story, "Local Woman Turns Betrayal into Empowerment Movement." At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I spoke briefly, my voice steady. "I used to think endings were meant to break us," I said. "But sometimes, an ending is just a mirror showing us who we were never meant to be." I thought my story ended the day my husband left me. But it turns out, That was just the prologue. The crowd erupted in applause. Somewhere in the front row, Daniel smiled at me like he'd known all along I'd find my way here. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like a creator, of my own peace, my own purpose, my own life. That night, I sat by the window, watching the stars. The apartment, the same one Richard once tried to throw me out of, was now mine alone. But it no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home. I poured a glass of wine, took a deep breath, and whispered into the quiet night. Thank you for leaving me, Richard. Because you leaving gave me back to me. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of lilacs through the window. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed. Soft, rhythmic, endless. Life was moving forward. And this time, I was the one driving. My love. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.